Greetings sailors and welcome to a supporter replay from PointyHairedJedi here in the Wichita in some very unfavourable matchmaking. This is a pretty nasty down tier. This is a tier 8 heavy cruiser and virtually everything else is tier 9 or tier 10. There's only 2 tier 8s per team and he is unlucky enough to be one of them. In fact, the enemy team's tier 8 cruiser is a Kutuzov, which is possibly a bit better suited to this kind of engagement so long as it has smoke anyway. So this is going to start off kind of slow, and I'll also say now this isn't necessarily an amazing Wichita game, but it's going to be an interesting game. It's going to be a solid result for PointyHairedJedi, but it's more the way this game develops that is the reason why I think he sent it in. And also, you don't see the Wichita played or featured that much, so it's interesting from my point of view to take a look at it as well. I can actually talk about it a bit as well. So as I said, tier 8 US heavy cruiser, and in a lot of ways it is very similar to the Baltimore. In fact, in some ways it's identical to the Baltimore. The gun range, rate of fire and HE shells, for example, are all basically identical. The armor scheme is very similar as well. It also gets not quite identical consumables, but almost. I think the only difference is whereas Bolty can slot a fighter instead of radar, this can have a spotter instead of radar. But why would you use either of those when you have the radar? So, you know, functionally doesn't really make any difference there. There are some notable differences though, not big ones, but they are there. In some ways, Wichita is worse, and probably the one that will have the biggest impact on how it plays generally is that the AP shells are lighter, they do less damage, they have a higher muzzle velocity, so they actually will behave a bit differently in terms of how much lead you need to give them compared to Bolty's shells. But because they are lighter shells overall, it also means they don't retain the punch that the US heavy cruisers are generally known for with their AP, so it's a little bit less effective in that regard. It's also got a weaker AA suite and has fewer hit points as well, so that all makes it just seem like a weaker Baltimore overall, but it does have one or two things going in its favour also. It's got a knot and a bit. It's like 1.1 knots better base speed, and of course you stick a flag on that, that will actually have a bigger benefit than it would on the Baltimore. Not by a huge margin, but you know, it's there. It's also stealthier and has much better handling in the water. It's got better maneuverability overall. So it's not a huge stealth difference. It's less than half a kilometre, but still it's a couple of extra 100 metres to play with. And it actually puts it more in the range of some of the Japanese cruisers in terms of how stealthy it can be. And the manoeuvrability especially, you've got a 6-second rudder shift, which is actually really good for a heavy cruiser. I mean, it's 7.8 on Baltimore, which is a lot more kind of what you would expect. And the turning radius is 680 versus 730. So, in terms of duking shells, this thing definitely is superior. But you kind of need that given that it has a couple of thousand less hit points. It's about 5,000 less, something like that, 5,000 or 6,000. So not a huge gap, but you know, that's enough to make a difference sometimes. So overall, it doesn't offer anything spectacularly different to the Baltimore. It's basically one of those premiums where it's more minor differences, and in some ways not totally insignificant differences, but not enough to really make it stand out compared to its tech tree counterpart. So thus far he's just been hoping to be able to sit behind this island and fire at stuff, but there's not been a lot of spotting going on. The Friesland hasn't been especially aggressive in this cap, and although they do have the other 2 caps, most of the rest of the team is down now at the A cap. They've basically split between the north and south ends of the map, whereas most of the enemy team seems to be coming up this way, and that leaves the B cap in a position of complete vulnerability, basically. There's nothing there to contest it, really, and the enemy team concentrating all their ships up here, and nobody's actually lost anything yet. This is a really slow start to this game. We're 7 minutes in and nobody's actually gotten sunk yet. Yeah, it looks like the enemy team's going to have all of their firepower and their hit points up at this end of the map, and with PointyHairedJedi's own team split, that puts this group of ships in quite a vulnerable position, his allies that are nearby. So he's got to be careful here. He's made a little sneaky shot or 2 as he went past there, but not for any particular effect. He certainly doesn't want to be sitting firing in open water right now. He doesn't really have the space to maneuver up in this corner, so he turns himself around and starts heading south, because I think he can see that they are going to need to get out of here, and his allies are also starting to withdraw, which is actually the sensible thing to be doing right now. They do not really have the numbers to just combat the entire enemy team, who are now more or less all congregated up in that kind of northeastern, north central quadrant of the map. North central quadrant, yes, that's... Yes, let's just move on. Right, so pops off a radar just to see if there are any of the enemy destroyers nearby, but it doesn't look like it. We've also had our first casualty in a Drake that just got sunk, actually on the other flank, because some of his allies pushed through from the A cap. Looks like there's one that's come over in this direction that goes to Kerr first, and everyone else is pushing up on the western side of the map, and that's put them in a vulnerable position in that they are being spotted by an enemy destroyer, and there's a lot of stuff there that can shoot them, a lot of stuff that's within range. PointyHairedJedi himself is being targeted by a slightly uncomfortable number of ships at the moment, and he's trying to keep as many of his guns firing as possible by weaving in and out, but that does make him a bit more vulnerable to taking hits. But here's where that superior maneuverability does help, being able to swing back in and out that bit quicker. He's also going to try using some AP here, but as I noted earlier, the AP on this ship is just that much less effective. It's still heavy cruiser AP, but it's less maximum damage, and more importantly, it has less energy retention. So it just isn't nearly as effective at punching through heavier armour as the Baltimores would be. So there's some torps going past, so that looks like... I don't even know whose torpedoes that would have been, actually. I think there was an enemy destroyer that got spotted and sunk while I was busy wittering away there. Or was that the Friesland that got sunk? I think that was their Friesland that got sunk. That's what that destroyer death marker is there. Oh, the other... Okay, it was the other destroyer on the other side that got sunk. So it was, in fact, the Oostergotland's torps. There we go. So it was their surviving destroyer. That's whose torps there was going past there. Mystery solved! At least now we know where they are in terms of them being in the B cap. We no longer have to worry about being spotted. But the bad news is their kid, who has gone in to contest the B cap against the Oostergotland, has run face first into a Minotaur. So unless they get lucky enough to survive and get their torpedoes off, no, it doesn't look like that was the case there. In fact, they actually got torpedoed by the Minotaur. The spotting was enough for PointyHairedJedi to attempt some shots, though. He's actually putting out some AP, and here's a case where the AP really it doesn't make a difference in terms of its penetration versus a Minotaur necessarily, but that Citadel will have gotten him just a bit less damage. So there's again where the Baltimore would have been superior. Of course, firing has also got him spotted temporarily, but health-wise he's actually doing alright at the moment. He hasn't been caught broadside or anything like that particularly, so yeah, he's not doing too badly overall, but in terms of damage he hasn't been able to do that much. He's had to be relatively cautious if he wants to stay alive, because this is a very harsh environment, as I noted at the start of the match. So at this point I think he is trying to perhaps get close enough to use his radar, but as we can see by that air spotting, that's not actually going to be possible, because the Oostergotland's moved out of radar range. They're on the other side of the cap now, so he tries a blind shot into that smoke. I don't know if that was really worth it. It just got him spotted, and he's being targeted once again. But this group of ships that's withdrawn from the north, and that, like I said, absolutely was the right thing to do, instead of sticking out and getting hammered to bits by the enemy team who were there in force. They are now in a position to try and retake the B cap. And in terms of trading ships, actually, both teams have been fairly close at this point. I mean, they are very close on points, and I think they're, what, equal on number of ships sunk at this stage? Pirates team have lost all their destroyers, though, which might be a factor, but given how things are working out, it might not. Both teams do still have their carriers as well, so in terms of spotting they at least have that. It's just they don't necessarily have the potential for sneaking around and torpedoing lone targets that destroyers might do, or, you know, sneaking a cap. Anyway, talking of destroyers, there is the Oostergotland, the last destroyer in this match, and they were well within Pirates radar range, so he's able to just hammer away at them, and because they have opened fire, he's able to keep hammering away at them even though his radar has expired. And he almost himself ran aground there. I think he was debating turning into the cap, and then decided to be a bit more cautious, and was able to not run aground because, again, tighter turning radius, it is useful sometimes. And with that final shot, that final kind of guesstimate shot, he actually does kill the Oostergotland. But they lost one of the battleships that was pushing in from the other side themselves, so the enemy team's actually overtaken in points at this stage. They really do now need this cap, and ideally to get some more kills, just to tip the thing a bit more in their favour, perhaps. Nice big hit there into that rune. Maybe Pirates can finish them off, although he's sticking with the high explosive. I mean, the rune is angling away a bit, so yeah, that's probably the sensible choice. But instead of firing and exposing himself just now, he is concentrating on capping, and I think getting a bit concerned about this battleship that is pushing down the other side, because he has to be basically the most attractive target left on this team right now. Everything else is either battleships or a carrier that is far away from the action, or, well, relatively far away from the action. Fortunately, however, because that allied, what is that, Musashi was spotted, the Bourgogne's first shots go towards that, so he has a bit of a window to fire and to manoeuvre here, but now the Bourgogne is very much interested in him, and their secondaries are also opening them as well, so I guess that would have to be full secondary range spec. It might not be secondary accuracies, but yeah, those Bourgogne's secondaries are absolutely blasting away here, and they are still very much focused on Pirates-Skenia, because he is in the relatively squashy cruiser. There's some slight irony here, is irony even the right word? The fact that he's in a tier 8 and has managed to survive this long, but it's not really irony at all. It's the fact that he has done his utmost to stay alive, even if I think that has cost him some opportunities when he could have done damage, and instead has chosen that discretion is the better part of valor. So he has now doubles his damage on the last time I mentioned it. In fact, not actually quite yet. That was, what, 35k, and he's just approaching 70k now with the fire he's got going on that Begonia, who is hastily trying to beat a retreat. Yeah, in the scheme of things, in a tier 10 game, that's not the hugest amount of damage. But it's still damage done. He still has killed their destroyer. He's managed to use his radar to good effect. And he's still got his guns in play, which at this stage of the proceedings is certainly not nothing. So that very low health Pommern's gone down, and this Vermont would be now a very nice extra one to take down, being of course a tier 10 battleship, but their own Georgia is now rather in trouble. They are at least not in any particular danger of losing this cap, and in fact the thing that is now most pressing is the timer. We're at less than 2 minutes, and having lost that Georgia, that has tipped it just back in favour of the enemy points wise. But because they've got those 2 caps, as long as they don't lose anybody else, or if they do but manage to trade, maybe that will be enough. In fact, it should be enough. But they are so close that also, if they lose, say, 2 ships at once, for example, then that could just instantly win one team, or instantly give the win to one team or the other based on points. So PointyHairedJedi is doing the risky thing at this point. He's closing the distance to the Vermont and was really desperately trying to finish him off, and then the enemy Georgia came round the corner and finished him off. But he did take down the Vermont for it's just a flesh wound, and because it was a cruiser's worth of points to the enemy team, that wasn't enough to instantly give them the win. And because he's traded for a battleship, they are now basically going to win this one on points. So that was a very, very close game. Wasn't a monster damage game, but given the matchmaking, I think PointyHairedJedi played that one pretty well overall, and I think the team actually played very well also. I mean, you can look at the team list. There were obviously some players on each side that maybe weren't being particularly effective, but if you look at the number of people on the enemy team that had over 1k base XP on a loss, this was a really hard fought game from both teams. And a lot of the times you can say it's either one team's or the other's game to lose rather than win, but neither team was ever particularly in a kind of a strong winning or a strong losing position there. It was a really terse battle overall. So although it wasn't a monster damage result, I actually think that was quite an interesting one to watch, or it certainly was for me anyway. So that wraps it up for this replay. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and if you did, you can do all the usual things down underneath it, and of course, as always, stay tuned for more.